Okay, what we're going to be going over this time is this is for Biology B, Unit 3. That's a test review. I've decided to again do a unit test review because that seems to be what most students are asking for. So this unit is on plants. So briefly, I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to, there are some things, I'm not going to go through everything in detail myself, but I am going to make sure that you, in one way or another, have the material that you will need, so that you will do well on the test. Some of this material are things, I'll list some things down, and there will be things that you'll want to review in your lessons about. Look them up. It's a good learning tool. It helps you remember some of the things that you're needing to look up. And so that'll help you also as far as doing well on your test. So certainly one of the things, since the unit is on plants, you need to know what products plants are used for. And there'll be a list. And you'll need to pick from, and there certainly are multitudes and multitudes of things that plants are used for. For example, lumber, certainly for building homes, building buildings, and paper comes from plants. So those would be two examples from the list that they give that you would certainly want to pick out, and those are probably the two most obvious ones. So be familiar with that. You might want to go through your lessons and review that. Another thing you're going to see on your exam is they talk about grafting. Now, if you graft, you've probably heard of grafting, where you take one part of a plant and you graft it onto the bottom part of another plant, and you enable that plant to grow. And so they have particular names for the for the parts that are involved in the grafting. And as you can see here, there's two pictures showing the same thing. Here's the scion, is the desired plant that you're going to want to grow. And so what they do, they actually graft it on right here, and the part that they graft it onto, they call the root stock. So the scion is the part that you're going to be grafting on to the root stock. And obviously, you can see, since that's the top part, that's the part that will in the future give rise to all the plant's leaves and stems, flowers, fruits. So the scion is typically the top part of a grafted plant, and then the rootstock, just like you see, is the lower portion of the grafted plant. It's the part that actually, this part here, will actually start producing the roots, as you can see down here. Now, layering is kind of an interesting way that they talk about in your lessons, involved in the reproduction of plants. And I have a really neat picture here. This is it here, where you take a part of the plant here and you actually bend it down, and you notice that part of it goes underneath the ground, and then you bring the tip of it up, so like the tip here. So you put it down, part is underneath the ground, but the tip is not left under the ground. It's brought back up. Now you can actually put some type of little clip here to keep that in place as is, but this is what we're talking about here. It's a technique in which a stem of the plant is bent to the ground and a portion of it is buried. And kind of interesting, they probably first tried this because many plants will root from the stem if they touch the ground. So they tried this, and sure enough, that works. But remember, the growing tip of the stem isn't buried. So I'd like to have you read through this. It's a type of reproducing of plants. Obviously, it's kind of an artificial way, because we are doing the burying and leaving the tip out. It can also happen, plants can do it themselves. If one stem kind of leans over and part of it becomes covered with dirt, the part that's still up can actually start growing into a new plant, and the part that's covered with the dirt will actually start producing roots, and so you can actually get a new plant that way. So that's what this picture shows. And there are different types of layering. This is a simple layering here, like we just talked about. Look at this one here. They've actually taken a longer stem here, and they've actually buried it twice. So they buried it once, and this has come up, and now they buried it again, and this has come up. So then when this starts developing roots, they can just go ahead and cut it right there, and then they can cut it over here, and you actually have the parent plant and a new plant and another new plant. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting way of doing it, and this is some of the other ways of doing it too. You might be interesting for you just to take a peek at them here. So there's a lot of ways of propagating plants to get more plants coming from the parent plant. Here's a good picture again of that layering that we were talking about, where you bring that one stem over and you bring it down underneath the ground and then pop up the tip of it, because that's the part where the new plant is going to form. Remember the leaves and the flowers and everything, and then the part that's underground actually starts developing roots. And then when it has come along enough, then you can go ahead and cut this here, and you actually will have two plants. Now you have two plants instead of one. So it's an asexual way of reproducing. So it's kind of an interesting way of obtaining more plants. So vegetative propagation is a form of asexual reproduction because only one plant's involved and the offspring is a result of one parent. So that new plant obviously is going to be genetically identical to the parent. And we talked about this can either be natural or artificial, like we just did it artificially, but both are asexual reproduction. And we want to know what fruits are. So I want you to look through your lesson and make sure that you know the difference between a fruit and a vegetable. And just and there's a difference between it in the kitchen versus as far as a botanist or a person who is a specialist in plants. The definitions could be a little bit different as to what they consider a fruit versus a vegetable. So we want to go as far as scientifically. We're not going to go by the definition in a kitchen when you're cooking. So a fruit is a seed-bearing structure that develops from the ovary of a flowering plant, whereas the vegetables are all the other plant parts, such as the roots, the leaves, the stems. Okay, so this is what's interesting. By these standards, even tomatoes are fruits. Even though in the kitchen we call that a vegetable, we put a tomato in our salad, we consider it a vegetable. Excuse me. It actually is a fruit. So, and look at this, celery, broccoli are all vegetables. Now, interesting enough, some nuts are also considered to be fruits depending on how they develop, while others are not. So make sure that you know the scientific definition in your lesson of what a fruit is, a vegetable, and know that some nuts are considered to be fruits depending on how they develop, while others are not. Even though in just general life, we never consider nuts to be fruits or vegetables. Now, they talk about plant evolution, and there are some scientists who believe in the evolution of plants, and there are others who don't. But we do need to, be familiar with the theory of evolution of plants. And so I want you to see lesson 14. It's called History and Diversity. And they actually talk about all of these. And according to that particular theory, what I'd like to have you do for the test is try and put these in order of the simplest to the most complex. And if you do that, you'll become more familiar with what an evolutionist believes as far as plant development. And then you'll also be able to fill that in on your test. Okay, endosymbiotic theory. Remember, you probably remember talking about eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic are the cells that are, they have a true nucleus. Prokaryotes are the ones like the bacteria. Well, some of the organelles, the mitochondria and chloroplasts, actually have a separate DNA from the nucleus DNA that a eukaryotic cell has. And so some people will come up with the hypothesis or the theory that that prokaryotic cells gave rise to eukaryotic cells. But interesting enough, the kind of an argument maybe against that too would be that chloroplasts, which have their own DNA, but it's not enough. Their DNA is not enough to make all the proteins they need. They still need to have the cells, a eukaryotic cell's DNA for them to reproduce. So for some, the endosymbiotic theory is kind of some evidence they feel to show that eukaryotic cells evolved from prokaryotic cells. But then there are some arguments against, because the DNA in those prokaryotic cells, in the chloroplasts or in the mitochondria, is really not enough DNA. There's not enough information there for that cell really to replicate on its own and make all the proteins needed. So it really needs some of the the cell's main DNA to be able to do that. So just be familiar with those two theories there. Phototropism, if we take photos, we're out in the light. So this is a light, and tropism means that it has a response. So phototropism means that there's some type of response going on to light. Like we could even have geotropism, and that would be a response. The tropism means response to gravity. But in this case, we're going to be dealing with phototropism, so it's a response to light. And this is very interesting. I'm sure we all know, and you've seen it a million times, where plants grow toward the light. If there's the sun's out, the plants are going to start leaning toward where the sun is. And this is all caused by auxins, and maybe from your reading you remember that. It's AUXINS, that are found in the meristem, the apical meristem here of plants. And usually when sunlight is directly overhead, that all the auxins are kind of evenly distributed throughout the shoot here, and kind of congregate toward the tip. But watch what happens when the sun goes over to the right side here, and so it's shining down here on this side. Well, the auxins, they move to the opposite side of the plant, away from the sun. And if you remember correctly, auxins are involved in elongation. They're getting longer, elongation of the cells. So if the sun is on this side, shining over here, all of the auxins goes to the other side of the plant, and it starts to cause the cells to elongate. And so when the cells are getting longer on this side than on this side, what does it do? It pushes the plant over toward the sun. Same thing would have happened if the sun had been over on this side. All the auxins then would have moved to the other side, the far side of the plant. It would have been those cells over there that would be caused to elongate, and when they elongate and this side doesn't, it elongates over and pushes, makes the stem point toward the sun that way. So kind of interesting how phototropism works. It's what's mainly involved is a hormone. Auxins are hormones, and the one particularly involved with this is the IAA. And so that's actually what causes plants to bend toward the sun, which we see all the time. I thought that was very, very interesting. Let's see here. Ethylene gas. This is kind of interesting. Have you ever had a ripe apple and maybe you put it next to some bananas that weren't ripe, or you had a ripe apple and you put it next to some bananas that weren't ripe? Ethylene is a gas. It's a hormone involved with the ripening of fruit. And it's also involved with the opening of flowers, shedding of leaves, etc. But the interesting thing about it is that this ethylene gas is produced by fruits. Like we'll say this banana here is starting to ripen. And so as it ripens a lot, it releases quite a bit of ethylene gas. And what it does, that ethylene gas moves over here to the fruit that's near it, and actually causes those fruits to start ripening more quickly. So if you put a banana next to unripe pears and apples, good experiment, see what happens. You're going to find that, or even put a ripe banana next to one apple and put another ripe banana, put a one ripe banana next to one apple, and then another apple that's about the same stage as the first one, put it by itself, and see if that apple that ripe banana will actually ripen more quickly. And most likely you are going to see, yes, it certainly does. So that ethylene gas is produced by fruits, and it's involved, like I said, with all of this. But the interesting thing about it is that ethylene gas can also escape from a particular fruit and cause fruit around it to also ripen more quickly. Here are those auxins again. Remember we talked about like the IAA. What's interesting about auxins is that they, in general, we know that now that they're involved in phototropism, but they're also, they're made in the tips of shoots, and what they do is they change the rate of elongation, just like they did in the plant cells. So that's what's really involved in the plant beginning to grow upward, okay, and starting to grow. It's that elongation of the cells. So know that auxins are hormones found in plants. most often made in the tips. Remember, like we were looking at the other slide, and we found out how those auxins can move to one side of the stem versus the other one. But they're involved in the changing the rate of elongation in plant cells. So they control how long those cells become. So note too that shoots, which are the top part of the plant, and roots, they actually respond differently to high concentrations of auxins. The cells in the top part of the plant, or the shoots, begin to grow more, elongate more, whereas the cells in roots grow less when we're dealing with auxins. In this example here, as you see how it's the pot hasn't turned over yet, but if the pot plant was to fall over, those auxins again make that plant go straight up. It makes the cells elongate. If it's near the tip, it makes all of the cells elongate, and upward it goes, straight up it goes toward light. And the roots now grow less. So just be familiar with that when we're talking about auxins. Stomata in a plant, you probably remember these. Remember in the most predominantly are in the bottom half of the bottom layer of a leaf, and so on the underside of a leaf is how I should have stated that. And so these are little like little holes. You can kind of see them here, and they have the little guard cells on the side, and like there's a hole right there. Here it's closed, so the guard cells have closed up here, but here it's open. Here it's open, so that hole is open, giving an entrance from the underside of the leaf into the leaf. And here's some actual stomata from an apple tree leaf, and boy, they're all over on the bottom side of the leaf there. This one looks like maybe they're just barely starting to open. But these stomata are very important in maintaining homeostasis, and I don't know if you remember what homeostasis is, but that's maintaining a stable internal condition or environment for the plant. You want the inside of the plant just to maintain a normal, healthy stasis there. Just like we want to have in our body, we don't want to have our temperature going really, really high to really, really, really low. Somehow there are mechanisms in our body that maintain the condition inside our body. And same with the plant, there are certain things that help maintain the stable internal condition of a plant. And so the stomata are one of the things that are involved with that. It takes in carbon dioxide when needed. It releases oxygen when needed. It releases water vapor when needed. So it's involved quite a bit in maintaining the integrity of the inside of the leaf. So know those stomata in a plant, and you'll notice, like it says here, the little guard cells. They call those little guard cells around the outside of that hole that can open and close. So there's a nice open one. Here's kind of a closed one, but this looks like it might be starting to open. So maybe these are beginning to open. But this is an actual picture here, as is this one. This one's an actual picture from a leaf on an apple tree, and so you can definitely see the stomata there. You need to know a plant life cycle, and I don't know if we're going to go in great detail on this. Plants have it's an alternating, and so that's why they call it alternation of generations, because there's something alternating going on here. Something's going back and forth here. And if you look at this, here's a fern, so we're familiar with a fern. And if you've ever looked on the underside of fern leaves, maybe you've seen the little spores that are there. And so the little spores will fall off, and they actually grow something here called a gametophyte. Sometimes it's so small you won't even see it, but it does happen. And there's a little roots growing. Okay, it's certainly a lot smaller than the fern. This is the main part of the plant that we see, whether it's in our house or wherever it is, outside in our garden or wherever it is. But anyway, the spores on the underside fall, and they grow into a gametophyte. Now what's neat about the gametophyte is that through mitosis, this little gametophyte makes male and female parts. And so the same little gametophyte, the same little gametophyte here makes male and female parts. And then what the male and female parts do is get together, fertilization takes place, and now look what happens. This little baby fern is starting to grow out of the gametophyte, and then it grows back into the fern, which we call the sporophyte. So that's called the alternation of generations. There's actually two forms in plants. Some you can see more predominantly than others. But this is a really good one, and it's fairly simple when you talk about a fern, because we've all seen ferns. Spores fall to the ground. A little gametophyte will grow. There's the little roots. Inside this little gametophyte, you see the male gametes and the female gametes made, and then they fertilize. One from the male gametophyte fertilizes the female gametophyte, and now you get a little plant growing out of the gametophyte. Here it's growing, and this is going to grow into that fern again, and all it does is keep circling and circling. So we're alternating between here to here to here to here to here. Alternation of generations life cycle. So that's plant life cycles are alternation of generations in form. We want to know the difference between primary and secondary growth in plants. You probably would be able to guess this one. Primary is certainly growing in length, production of leaves. Secondary is growing in girth. So I don't know if you can see this little arrow here. These are pointing to increase in width here. Okay, the stem is going to get thicker in girth. The roots are going to get larger in girth and width. Okay, so primary growth is growing in length. Secondary growth is growing in girth or width. Okay. And then there's a couple of additional things I want you to look up. Know what these terms mean. Make sure, and I think one of our projects we had to when we were dissecting our flower, we had to tell whether it was a perfect or imperfect flower. So plants that have male and female parts are called what? Are they imperfect or are they perfect flowers? Know what a plant needs in order for photosynthesis to occur. Obviously, we need sunlight. We need carbon dioxide. See if there's anything else. Just know what a plant needs to photosynthesize. Know the parts of a flower. They're actually going to have the parts of a flower, and you'll need to match it with its description. Know the difference between a dicot embryo of a plant and a monocot embryo of a plant. And know where food for both is stored. So know where the food for a dicot embryo of a plant is stored, and know where the food for a monocot embryo is stored. Now, that di kind of gives you a little idea about what we're talking about when we're talking about dicots. I want you to research that. Di means two, mono means one. So dicot has something to do with two of something. Monocot has to do with one of something. And I'd like you to know what transports food and water in a vascular plant. I'll tell you one, xylem. You need to know which one transports food and which one transports water. So I've given you xylem, it's X-Y-L-E-M. You're going to have to know, does that transport the food or does it transport the water? Okay. And what do you call the part of the dermal tissue that's made of hard, dead cork cells in a plant or a tree? So if you look all this up and you go back and do your reviewing with the slides that I gave you and go back into your lessons and really do some reading there on what I've given you here, do your research on the items that I asked you to research on, you'll do very nicely on your learning and you'll do very nicely on your test. So good luck on your test, and if you have any questions, just let me know. We can go over this together. And so thanks for watching. Make sure you give me a call when you're done watching this so we can just talk about a couple things and then go ahead and use this to study for your exam. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.